Hey there, third grade, and welcome to Social Studies, where we're talking about communities once again. And while this is a theme that we've talked about in our other lessons, here we're talking about the very first communities that were in the Americas. Even before European explorers came to this continent, they were the American Indian, the Native American communities. In my distant past, I have a great-great-grandmother who was Cherokee, so I kind of like to learn as much as I can about them because it does have something to do with my heritage. But the one thing that I keep coming back to that I really liked about the Native Americans was that they lived off the land, but they never took more than they needed. If they needed to eat, they would hunt a deer, maybe two, but they wouldn't hunt all the deer because they didn't worry about having possessions such as, oh, I want to have all the deer hides. Oh, I want to have all the antlers. They didn't worry about that. It's just what they needed to survive and what their family needed to survive. Now, they extended this courtesy to the European explorers when they first came over. I'm here to tell you that when the first European explorers came over, they were not prepared as they should be. You know, we've studied before what the four things an organism needs to live, and an animal needs to live. We need air, water, food, and shelter. Air and water are pretty easy to find. Food and shelter, you might have to look some. But just imagine how your day would go if you didn't have that refrigerator full of food in the kitchen and you didn't have the bedroom to sleep in. So when the first Europeans came over, they thought, oh, it's going to be easy peasy. There'll be food laying everywhere. And guess what? We're really here to get rich. You know, while we're wanting to get away from some stuff in England, we're really here to get rich. And so there should be gold everywhere. Where's all the gold? There's not gold everywhere. And so the European settlers, when they first came, the first round, all they brought was stuff to dig up gold with. They brought some axes, but picks, shovels. They really didn't bring anything to build shelters. And to even compound the problem, when some of the first European settlers came over, they didn't have any building supplies, so they took apart their ships to build a shelter. Well, if 80 people come over on a ship, and the ships really weren't, they were probably about as big as 2 or 3 average-sized houses today. So the people were really crammed in there. Well, even when you took those ships apart and you'd go to build a structure, it's really not good for 60 to 80 people. They just did not have enough. So then come the first winter, guess what? They had water. They had air. What little food they had was quickly gone because none of them knew how to hunt. Most of them lived in the city. They didn't have any outdoor skills. So that first winter was very hard for the first explorers. A lot of them got sick, and a lot of them died. Because if you can imagine, these people were all cramped in together in this structure. So if one got sick, they all got sick. They did not practice social distancing back then. And they didn't know exactly about how germs were spread from person to person. So it was kind of sad how the first round of explorers went for them. So let's watch this video about community heroes and the explorers.
American Indian communities. American Indians were the first people who started communities in what is now the United States. The American Indians of each community spoke the same language. They lived in the same kind of homes. They cooked and ate their foods in the same way. They used things they found in nature for food, clothing, and shelter. They lived off the land for thousands of years before explorers and settlers came from Europe. European communities. Christopher Columbus sailed to North America in 1492. That was more than 500 years ago. People from Europe began coming to North America. They wanted to build communities. They also hoped to find gold and other valuable things. Life in the new communities was hard. The people had to work very hard. Many people became sick and died. Some communities did not last very long. Others got help from the American Indians. The communities began to grow. More and more people came to America to build communities. English colonies. Most Most of the early communities were on the East Coast. Many were English colonies. The people in these colonies had to obey the King of England. Many of them didn't like England's taxes and laws. They wanted to be able to make their own rules and laws. The colonies fought a long war with England and became the United States of America. More new communities. After the war against England, the United States kept growing. People began finding new paths leading west. They explored the frontier. This was the wilderness area beyond the edge of the communities. We often call the first people to settle in an area pioneers. In 1803, the United States bought land from France. The land was called the Louisiana Territory. It was west of the Mississippi River. Many pioneers moved west to start new communities in the Louisiana Territory.
You know, it's funny because we've talked also in the past in our reading language arts, but also in social studies about doing something, being the first person to do something. And even then, it's hard because sometimes you just don't have the knowledge of what needs to be done. Can you imagine that if they wanted you to move west, but no one knew anything about anything anywhere? No, at this time, nobody really knew about the Mississippi River. Nobody knew about the Smoky Mountains, didn't know about the Rocky Mountains. They didn't know about all the grizzly bears up north. I would kind of equate this to today, us talking about going to other planets. The moon, we've been to. We have the technology, we could go right now and we could build a base. It's just money-wise that we have to worry about that. But we have the information on the moon that we need. Men have walked on the moon before. If we could do it in 1969, we could do it now easily. Where we're really talking about going is Mars. That's the next big step for us. We're going to have explorers. We're going to have settlers. We're going to have pioneers that sometime, probably in your lifetime, maybe one of y'all watching this video will end up living on Mars. We have a whole bunch of data there. We've sent probes. We've had remote control vehicles driving all over Mars for years and years now. We know about the terrain. We know what we would have to do when we get there. Here's the deal. You would have to be in a spaceship. It's like 3 months to get there. So to get there is just a monumental task for us. You would have to take all the stuff so that you would build your structures there. It's just like when the English first came over, they had to dismantle their ships. They didn't have all the stuff to cut down trees. They just didn't know that. We know that, but we will have to take everything with us because nothing's going to be there. We're going to have to take a way to manufacture our own air to breathe. We need air. Okay, they don't have it. We'll have to bring it. Water. Water's on Mars, but it's hard to get to, so we will have to take some water. Food. We'll have to take food. And plenty of it to get us going until we can build something as to where we can start manufacturing food. And then finally, shelter. When we get to Mars, we're going to have some way to build a shelter that humans can stay in without having to wear a spacesuit all the time. So there again, we have a pretty good idea. We're fairly knowledgeable of what we have to do when we get there. It's just the monumental and money aspect of getting someone from here to there safely. We could probably send people right now, but is our technology safe enough to send people millions of miles across space? Because once they're there, if something goes wrong, it's just like the colonists in the Americas. Once they were here, they were 3 months away. It would take 3 months for another ship to come, but they didn't know if they were in trouble. They had no way to contact England at the time. They were on their own. We would be able to contact the people on Mars, but believe it or not, it takes a few minutes. It takes a little bit for the signal to go back and forth. So we wouldn't know for a while if anything was going on. But what could we do? Because it would take quite a while to get there. So being the first at doing something, such as these settlers coming to the United States, and then now these pioneers moving west, it's hard for me to imagine because nowadays we know pretty much every part of the world. There are humans living on every continent, even Antarctica, which is highly highly anti-human. It's so cold there, it's not even funny. We have to have a structure to stay in, because if you step outside, you will not last very long. So we're now going to learn about two famous explorers that went out and were able to help prepare settlers to go out west. Let's learn about them in just a moment. Good old Lewis and Clark. These were two gentlemen that were assigned the task to go out and explore the Louisiana Territory. Here's the deal. They were both fairly knowledgeable on what to do out in the wild, but they had no idea about the territory that they were going into. They discovered all of these new Indian tribes, and it wasn't until they met their guide, Sacagawea, we'll learn about her in the next lesson, that they were able to broker deals. They had to trade, they had to barter with these tribes to get a lot of the materials they needed, because they couldn't carry everything. You know, it's crazy. They started out with all these men. They started out with these canoes, horses, so on and so on. Throughout the whole travel, they had to replace everything, sometimes more than once, because they were out there for years. The only thing, and I think this is cool, the only thing for Lewis and Clark that lasted the whole time was their cast iron cookware. That was the only thing. Like, just like I have here. This is a cast iron pot that I have. I use it for cooking. I've used it for camping for quite some time. It's very sturdy, but here's the deal. It's kind of heavy. When you look at this right here, this probably weighs a good 15 pounds. But it's pretty much indestructible. Now, it can rust. You got to worry about that. But for Lewis and Clark, they would just rub bacon grease on their cast iron. So I think that is very cool. So let's watch this video about Lewis and Clark.
After purchasing Louisiana from France in 1803, President Thomas Jefferson wanted the new territory explored. Captain Meriwether Lewis, the president's personal secretary, was chosen to lead the expedition. However, Lewis couldn't do it alone. He chose his good friend Captain William Clark and 31 other men to form what would be called the Corps of Discovery. To make the dangerous journey, they had an American Indian lady by the name of Sacagawea to help them with the various tribes they would encounter. The Corps of Discovery left in May of 1804. They traveled by foot, in boats, and on horseback. They encountered wild animals like grizzly bears, were sometimes sick and hungry, and faced rainstorms and blistering heat, but they continued their adventure through this uncharted land. Lewis and Clark discovered 50 American Indian tribes, 300 plants and animals, and the Rocky Mountains, but they never found the woolly mammoths they had hoped to see. After over 2 years of trials and amazing new discoveries, Lewis and Clark, with their Corps of Discovery, reached the end of their journey at the Pacific Ocean in September of 1806.
Now, I don't know about y'all, but I love a road trip just as much as the next person. Let's go up to Dallas-Fort Worth. Let's even go, like next year, I plan on going up to Yellowstone and Mount Rushmore and all that with family. We're going to take the camper trailer up. But we're talking a 4 to 5 week trip. For me, and I think that's going to be a pretty long trip. 2 years? 2 years? If you think they didn't get sick of each other every now and then, you're probably not thinking right, because if I had to spend 2 years out in the wilderness with someone, it would get a little old pretty quick. So they had to be very good friends to be able to do that. Can you just imagine having to go somewhere that that really no person you ever known has gone before, and have to explore wildernesses that no one that you know has seen before? Thank goodness they found Sacagawea, and she was able to help them. So we're going to watch a little bit more of the Blazing Westward Trail. We're going to learn a little bit more about Lewis and Clark.
New leader, new ideas. On March 4th, 1801, Thomas Jefferson became the 3rd President of the United States. Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence and helped America win freedom from England. Now, Jefferson wanted to explore the land to the west. In 1801, the United States didn't look like it does today. It was much smaller. The Mississippi River was the border on the west. Jefferson wondered what the land was like further west. Were the native people living there friendly? Did strange, giant animals live there? Would explorers find gold and other riches on the land? Jefferson really wanted to know. Louisiana Purchase. People had already explored the Mississippi River. Farmers used the river to ship animals and goods. The river ended in New Orleans, which was owned by France. Jefferson asked France to sell New Orleans and all the land around it. In 1803, France did just that. They sold even more land than Jefferson asked for. This sale is called the Louisiana Purchase. The United States paid $15 million for the land, and it doubled the size of our country. Explorers wanted. President Jefferson needed someone to explore the land and look for a river route to the Pacific Ocean. He knew a man who would be perfect for the job. Meriwether Lewis worked for the Army. Lewis was smart and had experience exploring land. Jefferson sent for him and told him about the plans. Lewis said yes and started getting ready for the long journey. Lewis spent hours talking with Jefferson about the plans. Then he went to the University of Pennsylvania to study animals, plants, rocks, minerals, and medicine. He learned how to use the stars to find his way at night. He even helped build a boat for the journey. He chose another explorer to help him. William Clark, a childhood friend of Lewis, would go on the journey too. Heading west. Lewis and Clark chose about 30 men to travel to the Pacific Ocean with them. They called their group the Corps of Discovery. All of the men had skills to help the explorers on their trip. There were soldiers, carpenters, blacksmiths, and boatmen. Some of the men understood different American Indian languages. They took food, tools, medicine, and weapons. They also brought along beads, ribbons, mirrors, and kettles to use as gifts for American Indian groups they met. In May 1804, Lewis and Clark and their men headed west from St. Charles, Missouri. They had no maps to help guide them. They followed the Missouri River. Lewis and Clark wrote in their journals every day. They made maps of the land as they traveled. They wrote about and drew pictures of 122 plants and animals that no one back east had ever seen. The group saw buffalo and grizzly bears for the first time. Home at last. The Corps of Discovery traveled for 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days. They made it all the way to the Pacific Ocean before heading home. The journey covered almost 8,000 miles. Lewis and Clark shared their journals and maps. Other people could now head west and start new communities.
Now, Lewis and Clark just freely gave away their maps and everything because they wanted people to have the best information and have the best chance when they went out west. Now, they could have tried to sell the information. They could have tried to keep it to themselves. But they wanted people to be able to move west. We were getting kind of crowded on the East Coast. We were getting quite a few people. So here, though, it just astounds me. I just talked briefly about how we're going to go up to Yellowstone and then come back down. For us, in a vehicle pulling a trailer, it's going to be roughly 3,000 miles round trip. Lewis and Clark did 8,000 miles without vehicles. They were on foot, on horse, or they went in a boat. 2 years, 8,000 miles. That just astounds me and just makes my esteem for them grow even more to be able to take on a task like that. And why did they do it? Well, one, they like to learn stuff, but they did it because they were part of the community of the United States, and they did it to help others and to make it easier for them. All right, guys, now that we're done, let's go do that assessment puzzle. We'll see you in the next lesson. Hey, once again, we definitely miss y'all at school. We do hope that you're staying safe, and while you're still out there, take care of each other, okay? We will talk to you soon. Bye.